Thanks for a lovely introduction. Thanks to the Humanities Festival for having me, and thanks to all of you lovely people for coming out. My hair has changed a lot over the years. That's what people don't really know what I look like. It's the same reason that the bills that come to my apartment are in my wife's name, and all the legal documents are in her name. It's because the man is out to get me, and I don't want anyone knowing where I live. I move every 2 years, and the hair thing is part of that. There's a small mistake in the program. It says that my upcoming novel is a love story set on the cusp of the Russian Revolution. I have a website, and I use it to announce upcoming readings or book tour stuff. But I don't have a book coming out every 2 or 3 years, and so I feel like the website gets lonely, so I just put up fake stuff periodically. And so in the spring, I finished my book, and I didn't want to say what it was about, so I wrote that it was a love story set on the cusp of the Russian Revolution, and that because I was writing outside of my experience, because there are a lot of white people in it, I had to do research. So I was watching a lot of episodes of The Golden Girls, and I thought that that would be sort of an obvious joke, but it's come up a lot. So that's that. The reading is pretty self-explanatory. I do want to give one sort of explanation. There are a couple of fiction writer jokes here, and only like 5 poet jokes. But the poets always walk out when I read this stuff really angry, even though it's only a small percentage. So I just want to make it clear that I love the craft of poetry, and I'm just kidding. And the other thing is that it's for the youngsters. Before we had computers, we would write on things called typewriters. And if you wanted to test the keys of a typewriter, you could write out a phrase such as, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog." It's a sentence that has every single letter in the alphabet, and so if you put it in, you would find out if all the keys are working. So that's that. How to write. There comes a moment in every writer's life when it is time to edit an anthology. So a year and a half ago, I started assembling an anthology on the writer's craft. I'm calling it How to Write and the Art of Writing. Writers write about writing. The idea was simple. Today's best writers on the topic of their choice. In short, writers writing about writing. I sent out letters to a lot of prominent people in the publishing community, agents, editors, fiction writers, non-fiction writers, no poets, and was delighted when people started responding. One of the first people to get back to me when I announced this project was Jim Phillips, who contributed the following wonderful essay, How to Write. Jim Phillips, of course, is the author of several works of fiction, including the novels Can't Get There From Here, You Gotta Know When to Fold 'Em, and the award-winning colloquial phrase I will use as a title. Last year he published the acclaimed work of cultural history, Ding Dang Dong, the true story of Frere Jacques, methamphetamine, and chronic insomnia. How to write. The art of writing can be reduced to a few simple rules. I share them with you now. Show and tell. Most people say show, don't tell, but I stand by show and tell. Because when writers put their work out into the world, they're like little kids bringing their broken unicorns and chewed up teddy bears to class in the sad hope that someone else will love them as much as they do. And what do you have for us today, Marcy? A penetrating psychological study of a young med student who receives disturbing news from a former lover. How marvelous, have a juice box. And Timmy, little Timmy, what are you holding there? It's a Calvino-esque romp through an unnamed metropolis, much like New York, narrated by an armadillo. Such an imagination, have a juice box. Show and tell, followed by a good nap. Rule number 2, don't go searching for your subject, let your subject Find you. You can't rush inspiration. How do you think Truman Capote came to In Cold Blood? It was just an ordinary day, and he picked up the paper to read his horoscope, and it was right there, fate. Whether it's a harrowing account of a multiple homicide, a botched Everest expedition, or a family of colorful singers trying to escape Austria when the Nazis invade, you can't force it. Once your subject finds you, it's like falling in love. It'll be your constant companion, shadowing you, peeping in your windows, calling you at all hours to leave messages like, "Only you understand me." Your ideal subject should be like a stalker with limitless resources, living off the inheritance he received after the suspiciously sudden death of his father. He's in your apartment pawing your stuff when you're not around, using your toothbrush and cutting out all the really good synonyms from the dictionary. Don't be afraid. You have a bestseller on your hands. Rule number 3, write what you know. Saul Bellow once said, "Fiction is the higher biography." In other words, fiction is payback on those who have wronged you. When people read my 2 books, My Gym Teacher Was an Abusive Bully, and She Called Them Brussels Sprouts, A Survivor's Tale, they're often surprised when I tell them that there's an autobiographical element to them. Therein lies the art, I say. How do you make that which is your everyday into the stuff of literature? You have to listen to this. Listen to your heart. Ask your heart, is it true? And if it is, let it be. Once the lawyers sign off on it, you're good to go. Rule number 4, never use 3 words when 1 will do. Be concise. Don't fall in love with the gentle trilling of your mellifluous sentences. Learn how to kill your darlings, as they say. I'm reminded of the famous editor-author interaction between Gordon Lish and Raymond Carver when they were working on Carver's celebrated short story, Those Life Preservers Are Just for Show. Often considered the high watermark of so-called dirty realism. You'll recall the climax, when the 2 drunken fishermen try to calm each other after their dinghy springs a leak. Nat, the salty old part-time insurance agent, reassures his young charge as they cling to the beer cooler. We'll get help when we hit land, I'm sure of it. No more big waves, no more sharks. We'll be safe once again. We'll be home. If you visit the Lilly Library at the University of Indiana and look at Gordon Lish's papers, you'll see how, with but a few deft strokes, he pared that down to create the now legendary ending, Help, Land Shark. It wasn't what Carver intended, but few could argue that it was not shorter. Learn to kill your darlings, and don't be shy about softening them up in a hostage pit for a few days before you do. Rule number 5, keep a dream diary. Rule number 6, what's not said is as important as what is said. In many classic short stories, the real action occurs in the silences. Try to keep all the good stuff off the page. Some real-world practice might help. The next time your partner comes home, ignore his or her existence for 30 minutes, and then blurt out, "This is it," and drive the car onto the neighbor's lawn. When your child approaches at bedtime, squeeze their shoulder meaningfully, and if you're a woman, smear your lipstick across your face with the back of your hand, or if you're a man, weep violently until they say, "It's okay, Dad." Drink out of a chipped cup, a souvenir from a family vacation or weekend getaway in better times, one that can trigger a 2-paragraph compare-contrast description later on. It's a bit like method acting, but you'll get the hang of it. Simply let this thought guide your every word and gesture. Something is wrong. Can you guess what it is? If you're going for something a little more postmodern, repeat the above, but with fish. Rule number 7, writer's block is a tool. Use it wisely. When you're asked why you haven't produced anything lately, just say, "I'm blocked." Since most people think that writing is some mystical process where characters talk to you and you can hear their voices in your head, Being blocked is the perfect cover when you just don't feel like working. The gods of creativity bless you, they forsake you, it's out of your hands and whatnot. Writer's block is like, we couldn't get a babysitter, or I ate some bad shrimp, an excuse that always gets a pass. The electric company nagging you for money, your cell provider harassing you, whatever, just say, I'm blocked, and you're off the hook, no questions asked. But don't overdo it. In the same way the babysitter bit loses credibility when your kids are off in grad school, there's an expiration date. After 20 years, you might want to mix it up a little bit. Throw in a Ralph Ellisonian, oops, my house caught fire and burnt up my opus. The specifics don't matter. The important thing is to figure out what works for you. Rule number 8 is secret. Rule number 9, have adventures. You gotta have adventures. The Hemingway mode was in ascendancy for decades before it was eclipsed by trendy, fabulous exercises. The pendulum is swinging back though, and it's gonna knock these effete eggheads right out of their Aeron chairs. Keep ahead of the curve. Get out and see the world. It's not gonna kill you to butch it up for once. Book passage on a tramp steamer. Rustle up some dysentery. It's worth it for the fever dreams alone. Lose a kidney in a knife fight. You'll be glad you did. Rule number 10, revise, revise, revise. I cannot stress this enough. Revision is when you do what you should have done the first time, but didn't. It's like washing the dishes 2 days later instead of right after you finish eating. Get that draft counter going. Remove a comma and then print out another copy. That's another draft right there. You do that enough times and you can really get those numbers up, which will come in handy if someone challenges you to a draft off. When the referee blows the whistle and your opponent goes, 26 drafts, you bust out with 217 and send them to the mat. And finally, rule number 11, there are no rules. If everyone jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? No. There are no rules except for the ones you learned during your show and tell days. Have fun. If they don't want to be friends with you, they're not worth being friends with. And most of all, just be yourself. Thanks. That was chapter 1. I'm going to skip ahead to chapter 5. Like I said, I asked a lot of people in the publishing industry, fiction writers, nonfiction writers, no poets. And when I heard back from James Wood, I was over the moon. James Wood, of course, is the most famous literary critic in the country, if not the world. His books, essays, and what he calls his little pensées are dissected and discussed by all those who really care about books. He's been published in The Guardian, The New Republic, and The New Yorker. Here he shares his formula for a close reading. We come to literature in our own way. It's called How to Read. We come to literature in our own way. For some, the gift is bestowed by a helpful governess who guides our fingers over the letters in a primer. For others, a private tutor first enlightens us to the majesty of the written word. How you arrive is immaterial. What is important is that you forget all that and learn to read anew. In my literary criticism, I've become known as a champion of the eternal verities and a scold of the trendy and fashionable. I've essayed to instruct your writers in how to write correctly. Now I will teach you to read correctly. When we see a word, we must ask ourselves foremost, what does it mean? This is the first step in comprehension. When we've accomplished this, we can proceed to the next word and so on. In due course, we have read the sentence in toto. By returning to the beginning of the sentence to perform a close reading, we unlock its essence. I learned this skill at university. Though born in the States, I journeyed abroad for my education and underwent my intellectual coming of age at Oxford. I remember when the first dispatches of dirty realism made their way across the Atlantic. I pored over each latest issue of Granta as if it contained the holy word, and perhaps it did. One of my favorites from that time has always been Raymond Carver, in particular his affecting tale, "Leave the porch light on, it'll be dark." There's a line in that story that has remained with me. One might say it left the porch light on in my psyche. Our protagonist, Gus, has had his shifts at the Unimarts cut by half. It's not clear where the money for Sadie's dental work will come this month, and this causes yet another blowout with Doris, who's just been let go by the beauty salon for excessive cussing. A bad week on the new American frontier. We know Gus is thirsty. For pages, Carver has created a matrix of connotation, employing language such as parched, dried up, and really frickin' thirsty to describe him. In short, Gus needs a drink. Once Doris slams the rickety screen door behind her, as she's done so many times before, but we suspect this time may be the last, Gus goes to the sink. As Carver puts it, channeling the sublime, he lifted the cup. He lifted the cup. Aha, cries the famished reader. This is minimalism at its well-marbled finest. The language is clear, bracing. You did not ask, what did this character do? He lifted. We do not wonder what he is acting upon, the cup. So often in today's literary fiction, we're left to make our way through the muddle of an author's hysterical wordplay. It is a false show. They confuse the encyclopedic for the illuminating and meaningful, mistake the exuberance of frenetic language for that which addresses the higher self. When you return to a writer like Carver at the end of a long day, it's a refreshing tonic. This sentence is short, not because it is brief, which it is, but because it has few words. The bookstores today are too full of writers who have nothing to say. If there's nothing at stake for the characters, then nothing could be at stake for the reader. The writer of fiction must embrace a fierce moral vision, or else he's little more than a cheap Fleet Street haberdasher. I decided early on that the work of Saul Bellow was an exemplar of this aesthetic imperative. You will recall the famous opening sentence of good old Augie. I'm an American, Chicago-born, and go at things as I've taught myself, freestyle, and will make the record in my own way. First to knock, first admit it. There it is in all its Bellovian glory, the bluster and bombast. Can you smell it? The musk of a virile sentence drawing blood into itself? It is about to spread the pubis of mediocrity and rut with the ineffable. We could all do worse than to write like Saul Bellow. And when I say write like Saul Bellow, I mean be Saul Bellow. And when I say be Saul Bellow, I mean unzip the very skin from his body as if he could wear it as some sort of Saul Bellow suit and get cozy in it and inhabit it so that we could truly understand the old master. Except he is dead, and he was quite short, so your arms and wrists would poke out of his flesh suit, as if you were some ruddy-cheeked schoolboy who's outgrown his uniform, grimly trudging home from the elementary and dreaming of the one day that you will write and be free from all these dullards and their cruel jibes. One day. Where was I? Compare that sentence to the work of one of our most celebrated young writers, Nelson Todd Nelson, whose experimental arabesques have earned him praise in all the predictable quarters. I won't name names. Every 3 years, Nelson and his enablers publish one of his doorstoppers, and the literary establishment falls in a swoon. Be still my heart. Nelson is that species of writer that the critic P.G. Wilson described so wonderfully as a numb plotter goose in his amusing taxonomy, All the Pretty Numb Plotter Gooses, Sketches from Literary Life. I pluck a sentence at random from Nelson's latest book, latest sensation, The Obfuscations. Phillips heard someone at the door and went to answer it. Phillips heard someone at the door and went to answer it. Doubtless Wilson spins in his grave over this quack-quacking. Consider the superfluous words. If someone is at the door, it follows that the door will be answered. Nelson needn't belabor the point. Why not include he breathed and his heartbeat as he went to the door? We're not stupid, and yet Nelson treats us as if we were inmates at some lesser asylum. He patronizes us, that is, when he's not playing these tiresome postmodern games. It is all the rage among his ilk to overflow their tones with pop culture references and brand names, as if such addle posturing were an adequate substitute for character. Is it really so clever to name your hero Phillips? Or should I say anti-hero, for the characters in this book are rarely for anything. But to name him as after a popular manufacturer of consumer electronics? What exactly is he trying to say apart from, I am a numb plotter goose? Does it enrich our notion of the exquisite? What else to add about this deplorable sentence? That is not the musk of potency I sniff here, but the bald, undeveloped parts of the JV squad. The caliber of umbrage it rouses in me cannot be contained by my usual disparagements. This is not piffle, nor is it twaddle. The tragedies of this debased age require a new construction, twiffle or paddle. This is not the sterile language. This is the sterile language of the navel-gazer, the lotus-eater, the hermetic fictions of those who do not mix with the world. Nelson and his cohort need to get out of their writing chambers and engage that which lies outside their very doorstep, grab their bowlers and walking sticks, and perambulate the boulevards to see how people really live today. In closing, I direct your attention to a perfect sentence. Yes, they exist. One of the pleasures of my profession is discovering these elusive unicorns in the books sent for my review. I read half a score of books each week. I'm a fast reader and generally underwhelmed by what passes for good writing these days. But once in a while, among the gaudy offerings, I come across one of those luminous sentences that make the soul vibrate. I share with you a recent find. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. I can't remember exactly where I read it. It was a busy day as I was buying a new typewriter and handing in the manuscript of my latest tome, The Janus-Faced Chimera, missives from a reader and writer of the prose arts. The provenance of the sentence is not the issue here. Its terse beauty most assuredly is. Who is this brown fox? And how did he get so fast? To what can we attribute the lethargy of the canine? Is it some onerous matter of faith or vast existential conundrum? Where is the fox headed? Into what gaping darkness? Indeed, where are we headed? For we are all of us implicated here. This is a sentence that insists upon itself and at the same time points to the greater mysteries, as if there were some secret order determining every letter. What more can we ask of art? I'm going to skip ahead to chapter 11, inside the workshop. Of all the people I contacted for this project, the fiction writers, the non-fiction writers, no one has influenced me as greatly as the next contributor, and I'm honored that she agreed to participate in her own fashion. Melissa Dibble is the author of 2 novels. The first, A Cool, Dry Place, received the Pulitzer Prize. The second, Away from Light, was published exactly 25 years later and also received the Pulitzer Prize, making Dibble the only person in history to receive the Pulitzer Prize for 2 books published exactly on the same day, 25 years apart. Last fall, she allowed us to record her first day of class at Connersville University. So we're grateful for this glimpse into the workshop experience. Inside the workshop. Can you reach that window? I find the street noise bothersome. Thank you. I like to begin by going around the room and learn a bit about the group. Where you're from, who you like to read. How about you? You seem to be hiding behind your book bag. What made you sign up? Oh, God. To delight and entertain in accordance with the highest literary principles, blah, blah, blah. Spare me that crap from the MFA handbook. You knuckleheads better understand something. I wouldn't trust you to write a grocery list, let alone a highly acclaimed work of historical fiction. This is the first lesson. Everything you know is wrong. And you, where are you from? Secaucus. Only two things come out of Secaucus: genre writers and creative non-fictioners. I don't see any elliptical nonlinear sentences on you, so you must be a genre writer. That right? You write genre fiction? Something a little more literary? We'll see about that, Missy. Who said that? Do you have something you'd like to add? So we have a comedian in us. Got a sense of humor. You remind me of this guy I used to know, Mark Pfeiffer. Wrote sudden fiction. Thought he had all the answers. Everyone said he was going somewhere. Publishing in all the right places. Last I heard, he was selling his sudden fiction on eBay to make ends meet. $5, $6 a pop on a good day. Every year the same thing. Coming fresh off the bus and think you know everything. You'll know how easy you got it. We didn't have all these fancy writing programs when I started. No one brought a lunch basket to my studio at the Writers' Colony. Didn't have no quickie with the cowboy poet in the Yadu library. You know how I wrote my first book? I had 3 kids and a husband who was good for nothing except passing gas. I used to write from 5:30 a.m. to 5:35 a.m. every morning. Get up, write for 5 minutes, and then take care of the kids. Took me 10 years to write that book. Any of you snot-noses think you could pull that off? And you, look at me. Why are you here? Used to write poetry in college and thought you might want to give fiction a try. How nice of you to bless us with your presence today, Missy. At least you got some smarts getting out of that racket. Who wants to be just another trochee-sucking misfit? Prose poem? I didn't understand a single word that just came out of your worthless mouth just now. If it has line breaks, it's poetry. If it doesn't, it's prose. It's not that complicated. You know what? Why don't you get out of here? Just take your crap and go. Come back when you figure out who you are. That's one down. As you may have heard, I conduct workshop according to craft method. I've been a certified craft method instructor for over 30 years. I was one of D.L. Crawley's final students, so that makes me an Omega level craft method instructor. Can any of you mopes tell me who D.L. Crawley was? Pathetic. You are truly the sorriest bunch of wretches I've ever had the misfortune of staring at across conference tables arranged in a U-shape. D.L. Crawley was one of the greatest literary minds of the 20th century. He was Ernest Hemingway's bunkmate at summer camp and was the actual author of In Our Time and The Sun Also Rises. Hemingway stole the manuscripts from beneath D.L.'s mattress one night and published them under his own name. D.L. based Nick Adams on a school chum of his who died during the influenza epidemic of 1918. They were lovers briefly. The story's a kind of eulogy. I see you're paying attention now. A couple years later, Hemingway telegrams D.L. and says he wants to apologize, and D.L. agrees to meet him. They have a drink in the Oak Bar of the Plaza Hotel. Hemingway slips him a Mickey and steals the manuscript that D.L. has just completed and which happens to be sitting in his trademark leather satchel. The name of that manuscript? A Farewell to Arms. Actually, D.L. Crawley called it silent spills across the ghastly trenches, and on his deathbed grudgingly admitted that his former friend had made the better choice. You know the rest. Hemingway even shot off his own testicle to cover his tracks. That's the kind of psychopathic personality you find on the fringes of the writing industry. The whole affair is recounted in Frank Bellow's The Hemingway Hoax, which we keep on call in the Morton Library. D.L. could have been crushed by this injustice. No one would have blamed him. Instead, he dusted himself off and opened up the Blue Hills Workshop in the backwoods of North Carolina and dedicated himself to devising the first fully integrated creative writing educational system in this country. Craft method. He taught worthy students of fictions for 25 years until the program busted up. The usual stuff that happens when powerful personalities are locked up together on an isolated campus away from civilization. I was there that final academic year. D.L. said some things to me. I would have punched him in the balls if anyone else talked to me like that. But of course, D.L. was different. He was the only completely sexual being I've ever come across. Craft method consists of 5 discrete modules. C, control your fear. Do you know how many short stories were started last year? 750,000 short stories. And how many were completed? 115,000. What happened to the rest? Fear? Fear of failure? Fear of success. Fear of unleashing the creative individual within. Recognize the artistic fire. In the heart of each of us is a flame. In its natural state, it is the size of a candle, and so it remains for most people. Craft method shows you how to feed that fire until it is a great conflagration, consuming all doubt and weakness and converting it into heat and light, the artistic fire. Align the words in their proper sequence. Just as there's a sacred design in nature, so is there a sacred design in every creative endeavor. Learn the underlying order of phrases, sentences, and clauses so that your work may find harmony with this principle, or alignment. Focus your vision. What are you trying to say? Which of the 12 types of characters, the 7 plots, and the 4 themes that D.L. identified as the deep structure of storytelling best serve your purpose in this tale? What combination thereof? Focus your vision on these essential components and make them work together. Finally, tell the world your story. Once you've completed the first 4 steps, you can combine them into that consummate creative act, telling a story. As it was with the cavemen, so is it today. For are we not cavemen still, symbolically loinclothed, mere brutes? We still have that primal need to listen to stories and to tell them. Craft method. It's not going to be easy. Take a minute to look on the person on either side of you. Chances are they're not going to be here come spring. But for those of you who do make it, the rewards are immeasurable. Among the successful graduates of Craft Method are 8 Pulitzer Prize winners, 11 National Book Award winners, and 28 recipients of the Platinum Ink Pot. There's always a kid in every class who thinks he's the next Nelson Todd Nelson. I'm sure you'd be surprised to learn that Nelson is a Craft Method graduate, never misses the annual picnic. There is a place in this volume for unabashed enthusiasm for literature, even from the most unlikely quarters. Here, Rick Davis offers his personal take on the touchstone of modernism, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. Prufrock, I love you, baby, but you gotta lighten up. You gotta chillax. I don't know what got into you last night, but you were really out of control. I grow old. Jesus, I grow old, you grow old, we're all growing older, dude, you gotta roll with it. Was it your birthday or something last night? I get like that on my birthday sometimes. I wanted to say something the last time we hung out, but I didn't. It was when we went to that strip club, the one with the mermaid theme. Everybody was having a good time except for you, Frowny. I asked you what was wrong, and you said, I've seen the mermaids giving lap dances each to each. I do not think they'll give a lap dance to me. I was like, just ask. Flag them down, that's their job, giving lap dances. But you just kept brooding and pounding beers until you passed out, and we had to carry you out to the parking lot, like a patient Jägermeister on a table. Proof rock? I think maybe you should cut back on your drinking. I totally hear you. It's hard out there in the dating scene. Been a while since I was on the market, but I remember. You tell me about these internet dates you go on, and I thank God I have Betty in my life. Going to a cafe for toast and tea. The women come and go, talking about Michelangelo. Sounds rough, but I don't know why you keep going after these icy Gwyneth Paltrow types. They're bad news. You gotta find someone who loves you for who you are and stop trying to be who you think they want you to be. Proof rock? Some of the guys say you're the last man of the previous era. Others say you're the first man of the next generation. I say, you're bumming me out and I'm over it. When I first met you, you shook my hand and said, J.L. for Proof Rock, damn glad to meet you. Like you were running for the president of the United Federation of Dorks. Every time I try to give you a nickname, you get all mad and stuff. Al, JJ, Freddie P. There's no shame in these things. They're all perfectly acceptable variations on your own name. Why not The Rock? I'm The Rock, baby, damn glad to meet you. You say that, you're running for the president of the United Federation of Badass Motherfuckers. This is the love song of The Rock, baby. That sounds totally awesome. And you know what else I think is awesome? You. I just wish you could see it. Last week you were all, I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. Admiral Buzzkill reporting for duty. Why do you have to put yourself down like that? You can really have a negative self-image sometimes. I'm going to lend you this book I got a while back. Help me out of a jam. It's called The Secret. People say, oh, that's just positive thinking. I don't care what you call it fucking works. Proof rock, I'm the best at what I do. I have held my party own with the world's top partiers in all the world's top party cities, on every continent, yes, even Antarctica, where I blew my mind on fermented polar bear sap, the homebrew of some climatologists of my acquaintance. So I trust you'll listen to me when I tell you these two things. One, the human race is in a war against global warming and we're losing. And two, maybe you should rethink your approach. Presentation, proof rock. Presentation is important. We live in a visual culture. But you can't let it paralyze you. You're worried they'll say, his hair is growing thin. Get some plugs. There's no stigma anymore. You remember what my head used to look like? I'm telling you. You're worried they'll say, how his arms and legs are thin. What happened to that gym membership you kept talking about? Let me guess. You went a few times, then you started slacking off. Well, if you're not going to be on top of it, who is? People are always going to talk shit about you. There are a lot of haters out there. You should hear what they say about me, but you don't see me getting all bunched up about it. And a lot of women find a bald head sexy, because you know what a bald head looks like. Start with something small. Get some new threads. Should you wear the bottoms of your trousers rolled? You could do that. I don't even know what you're talking about, but you could do that. You could walk around with your jeans hanging off your butt like all the kids today. Or you could buy a really smart sports coat. Something that's casual, but also dressy if the need arises. It's okay to spend some money on it if you're really going to get a lot of use out of it. I'm sure Betty would love to tag along. She buys all my clothes. You think I picked this out? I'm a slob. And while you're shopping, you can ask Betty about this doctor she goes to. They're doing remarkable things in pharmaceuticals these days, micro-targeting areas of the brain. Then there's small talk, like last night you said, I am Lazarus, come back from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all. That's a great start, it's a little heavy. I gotta say it was a little heavy, but it's a great start. Zombies are really in right now. Why don't you rent some zombie movies and use them as a conversation starter in a bar or other social gathering? Like, are you a fast zombie person or a slow zombie person? I'm slow zombie myself, and I've always been a big fan of the classics. Prufrock, you say classics, and then you can start talking about jazz or middle period Fellini. You can have that one, the zombie thing. That's a freebie, but then you're on your own. And try to lay off the whole, Mr. Intense Gaze thing you do. The ladies find it a little off-putting. I think the big takeaway here is that if you want people to love you, you gotta love yourself first. So go for it, dude. Eat a peach. They're in season. In fact, I picked up some nice ones at the farmer's market last week. They were great. Betty loved them. Organic, humanely picked, all that shit. Maybe we can go together. I think they're open today. Let us go then, you and I. Always a lot of chicks at the farmer's market. You can try out that zombie thing. Thanks. So, if you have any questions, advice? Or you'd like me to give you? I don't need any advice. But yeah, are there any questions, or Mike's here, or you can just shout them out? Hi.
When are you going to reveal the secret of number 8?
That's really sort of higher level craft method stuff. The first tape is free. After that, there are $200 for each tape, but you got to pay to play. Hi.
Hi. When you started writing, did you have a particular audience in mind, or you wrote to be writing to express yourself and let the audience find you?
Well, I guess when I started writing, or thinking that I wanted to write, I was, it was always great to discover some writer I never heard of who wrote something that sort of touched me and was very instructive. And so when I started writing, I thought that my ideal audience was some kind of weird kid who was like 12 or something, and they read one of my books and like, oh, this seems like a cool job. Why don't I do that? But now that I actually have books that come out and I see who shows up, it's totally, I have no idea who they are. There's a lot of different types of people, and it's completely different from that little kid I thought I was writing to. And now I don't write to really to anybody. I'm aware of what I've done before, and the person I'm most concerned with reaching is is myself. I try to have each book be very different and not boring myself by repeating myself. I approach new work with that in mind. I'm trying to do something I haven't done before, and hopefully I can learn something as I do it. Hi.
Do you have, how many other people do you have, say, read your drafts? I mean, is it your wife, is it your agent, is it, a couple of friends to get different perspectives on what you're doing?
For most books, for my first 4 books, I can go on cruise control and hunker down without any outside input for about the first third of the book. Then I wake up and I'm like, is this book that's totally crazy? And then I have to give it to some friends. So I have a non-fiction writer, a fiction writer friend, and a poet friend. I show it to my wife and my agent. And then once I get feedback on the first third, I can power through to the end. With my most recent book, the one that's coming out in the spring, it's very different. My first few novels have had this sort of high concept-y premises, and my next one is it's more autobiographical. It's about some kids growing up in the 80s. They live in New York City and go out to Sag Harbor in the Hamptons for the summer. And the setup is that their parents work in the city during the week and only come out on weekends, so they have like, the whole run of the community to themselves. Which is like what happened to me. I grew up in the city and we got to Sag Harbor in the summer, and my parents were never around. Because they're nerds, there aren't like a lot of like big adventures. The big thing, like they take away Coke, and new Coke replaces Coke. That's like a big plot point. He gets his braces off in chapter 7, and that sets up the final act, getting his braces off. But because this book was very different, I would show each chapter to my agent, just to make sure it wasn't some kind of weird, mawkish thing. I never really liked coming-of-age stories growing up, and I never really got into Catcher in the Rye. I think now if we just gave Holden Caulfield like an Xbox and some Prozac, the book would have been much different and maybe a little more cheerful. So because this book was very different, I ended up each time I finished a chapter, I would try to get a pat on the back from my agent, and she's a very good reader, and so it was a different process for me this time. Hi.
Could you just say something about how you came up with the Google superego? And are you going to develop that into a piece?
No, it's sort of like a joke, but I guess, Google's always correcting you, because like, I have a spelling check on my Microsoft Word. I don't know how to spell anything anymore, because it's always like immediately corrected. And so if you put something into Google, it's always presenting a better version of what you just asked. An ideal Google version. So I guess the idea is that if you could walk around with a Google superego, you'd be, never make any mistakes. And so like, if there's a Top Chef marathon coming on Bravo, I would say, I'm gonna watch 10 hours of Top Chef, and the Google superego would pop up and say, don't you mean read a book and take a nice walk in the woods? So I think we could all do with a Google superego bar that comes up and just sort of tells us the better option. My friend?
Have you changed your approach to writing as you had several successful novels?
Well, I guess, the actual starting and writing is the same. Like I spent 8 months sort of outlining it and doing research. Some people just start with a blank page and keep going. I have to know like what the beginning and end is. The middle can be hazy, but I have to know like what I'm writing towards. And I can't do, I've got a complete day. I can't do like write from 5:30 to 5:35 a.m. like the person in the story. If I have like a doctor's appointment at 2, like, I'm like, the day's ruined, I can't write, forget it. And if I get back from that appointment at 4, what's the point of starting at 4? The whole day is shot and, you've lost something. So I need like a full day, and I just have a quota system of like 8 or 5 or 10 pages a week, depending on how the book is going. And I have to do 5 pages a week, so that can be Monday like 3, and then 2 on Sunday, or 8 on Monday and Tuesday, and then I have like the rest of the week off. But some Sundays are always crunch day. So that's always worked for me, and that's about it, I guess. So, hi, sir.
How important do you feel in any type of writing? How important is a metaphor, the use of a metaphor?
Yeah, that's one of those sort of abstract things I can't really break down, because I've sort of learned how to, how to use a certain set of imagery throughout a piece, and you could say I haven't learned, but I feel like I've become comfortable with it, and I can't really sort of break it down scientifically, which is unfortunate because I teach creative writing from time to time, and I'm like, a metaphor has to, like it's hard to get it into words. So you become better at all different sort of aspects of storytelling by doing it more and more. And you fail and you fail and you get a little bit better next time. So, in response to your question, I can't answer it. Hi.
Hi, what are some of your influences or favorite writers?
Well, when I was a kid, I read a lot of horror and science fiction, so I felt like Stephen King was like the coolest dude ever. When I got to college, I wanted to be like the Black Stephen King and write like the Black Salem's Lot or like the Black Shining. You can take any Stephen King title and put the black in front of it. And that was like my highest goal. It wasn't until I started reading more contemporary fiction in college that I started to have this different sort of book you could write. And reading Beckett and Garcia Marquez, with the absurdists of the 60s, like Thomas Pynchon, all the sort of tools of the absurdist worldview, to me are the same as the tools you use in horror and science fiction. There's a certain sort of world you're building, expectations you're creating in the reader, and if you tweak reality, whether it's in Borges or Garcia Marquez or in Stephen King, for me it's a way of getting at the truth. And if you're just using sort of fantastic or absurd element. And so, definitely in college I was attracted to people who had definitely surreal visions of the world, like Ralph Ellison, Thomas Pynchon, Don DeLillo. And for me, that sort of way of talking about the world is, I saw the same sort of truth-telling in like my fantasy, upbringing. Hi.
You have a wonderful physicality, and there's kind of an energy to the writing. How do you sit still long enough to write?
Actually, I play loud music when I work. So it's like, like The Clash or Daft Punk, or if it's like fast guitars or a fast beatbox, it sort of gets me going. In terms of like reading, there's no training on how to be like a reader, and so. With my first book, I read like this because my hands were shaking, I couldn't stop them. Even though my brain was like steady, I was just so nervous. So over time I've learned to become a better reader and also find parts of my books that I'm able to read, like not too many big adjectives, and stuff that sort of represents my sense of humor. So over the years, through trial and error, I've learned how to find stuff that I can read well and is fun to read. So, hi.
Do you feel that Saul Bellow reaches some kind of truth or any kind of truth?
Oh, I like Saul Bellow, but just making fun of stuff is sort of fun to do. And certainly when I make fun of like postmodernists or other parts of this project, I am making fun of my own books too. So I think you can't take it too seriously. Writing is, lofty, something or other, but doesn't mean, there aren't opportunities to make fun of it. And you had a question? I think it's probably the last question.
Yeah, along those lines. Was this project kind of like coming out of illustration of the literary scene, or did you figure out approach some of these things?
Well, I think I finished the novel I just completed in the spring, and I was still kind of creatively on, so I started writing short pieces, and they turned out to be these sort of humor pieces. The first one was about Brooklyn writers, because I would get asked by interviewers, a lot of American interviewers, but also abroad, like, what's it like to write in Brooklyn? And it's just so ridiculous. It's like writing anywhere. It sucks. And and then he asked me to be on a panel about Brooklyn writing. There's no sort of one school of Brooklyn writers. We just haven't lived there because it's cheap. Moved there because Manhattan was getting more expensive. And so it started out addressing. So basically, I just wanted people to stop asking me that. So I wrote that piece, and then I started just having fun with sort of cliches of writing and the writing world. And so they're nice and short. I don't have to wait 3 years for them to be done, like I do with the book. They're 5 pages. They're a few afternoons, and I have fun writing them. And I'm not sure if they'll end up being a book. I have 10. Some I think are really good. Some are just kind of heh heh. And then I might not. The ones I have planned might not pan out. So I'm just going to keep writing them when I have downtime, and see how it goes. So thanks a lot, you guys. It was a lot of fun.
everybody.